At least 15 people have been reported killed and 100 injured in the Israeli shelling of a United Nations school in Gaza. The school was being used as an emergency shelter. This comes as a further 31 people, including 3 children and an 18-month baby, were killed in a bombardment by the Israeli military. This comes just a day after the United Nations Human Rights Council voted to launch an inquiry into the ongoing Israeli offensive's alleged violations of international laws. An Israeli airstrike on a motorbike killed 3 Palestinians earlier today. Speaking today, United Nations Humanitarian Chief Valerie Amos expressed extreme concern at the situation in Gaza, warning that residents are running out of food and water. Over 100,000 are now sheltering in United Nations schools, 2 of which have so far been attacked. Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu has responded to United Nations criticism, calling it a travesty of justice, fairness and common sense.
It's a travesty of justice. It's a travesty of fairness. It's a travesty of common sense. It's a travesty of truth.
Israel says it needs more time to eradicate cross-border tunnels, whilst Hamas have reiterated their demand for the blockade on the Gaza Strip to be lifted. Leader of Hamas, Khalid Mashal, has said any ceasefire deal must include an end to Israel's blockade. At least 140,000 people have so far been displaced in the Gaza Strip, as IDF targets continue to include hospitals, homes and schools.
فتفاجأنا انه الاسقف تبعت المسجد والمأذنة والهذا بتتناثر على البيوت وبتصاوب عدد من الاطفال وبيستشهدوا اولاد صغار عندنا. انا زي ما انت شايف يعني اصابة كسر في المفصل وفي عدة شهداء صغار كلهم من الاطفال، لا مقاومة ولا غير مقاومة، بس كعالم اعتقد انه الاحتلال فقد صوابه فالقصص وبدأ يفش غله في المدنيين واصلا مش فاهموا ايش بيعمل.
At least 475 houses have been destroyed by Israeli fire, with thousands damaged. Some 46 schools and 56 mosques and 7 hospitals have also suffered varying degrees of destruction. Just yesterday, media offices were also the focus of strikes. This morning, further Israeli tanks and soldiers were seen moving into Gaza, as smoke billowed after explosions in the coastal enclave. Speaking in Jerusalem, Britain's Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond has said the UK will stand by Israel's right to defend itself, but warned its military must be wary of civilian casualties.
Now, the British government is very clear that Israel has the right to defend itself, just as we would defend ourselves if somebody was attacking us with rockets. But that right has to be exercised with proper restraint and with proper effort to minimize the civilian casualties.
A limited humanitarian ceasefire, which may take effect by the weekend, has been pushed by Egypt, Turkey and Qatar. The ceasefire would be in time for the Eid al-Fitr festival at the end of the fasting month of Ramadan. US officials have described any truce by the weekend as unlikely, as did an Israeli security cabinet minister. Israel has said that the army would need a further 1 to 2 weeks to complete its main mission. Meanwhile, the US Federal Aviation Authority has lifted a ban on US airlines flying into Tel Aviv. The ban came into force on Tuesday, after a rocket landed about a mile away from the Ben Gurion airport. Several European airlines have continued to avoid landing in Tel Aviv. Local reports have said that Hamas-affiliated military, the Al-Qassam brigades, have killed 8 Israeli soldiers in northeastern Gaza City. Both the Palestinian and Israeli military have engaged in intense clashes across the Gaza Strip since the beginning of the ground invasion last week. The IDF have admitted 32 dead, with 140 Hamas fighters dead. Including civilian loss, 17 days into Operation Protective Edge, over 700 Palestinians have so far been killed. I will do everything in my power to make sure they never get a state. No more negotiations, no more illusions. That was Naftali Bennett, the current Israeli Minister of Economy and leader of the right-wing political party, the Jewish Home, speaking before his election last year. He, along with Eilat Shachid, are a growing number of parliamentarians in the Knesset, channeling a wave of right-wing politics in Israel, a wave much further right to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. Likud in itself is the major right-wing political party in Israel. Founded in 1973, its victory in 1977 was a major turning point in the country's political history. The Jewish Home currently hold 12 seats out of the 120 in the Knesset, a number growing since their inception. They sit in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud coalition government. In the midst of the current offensive in Gaza, where hundreds have been killed and over 1,000 have been injured, Post-Regal member of the Knesset, Eilat, was quoted as saying, "Palestinian mothers should be killed." But the response by Israeli politicians to the current offensive and the ideologies they stem from are not new to Israeli politics. With leaders famed for varied roles in the formation of the current Israeli state, few are more well known than Ariel Sharon. Military man Sharon made his name during the 1982 Sabra and Shatila massacres, where thousands of Palestinians were killed, also recognized as a champion of Jewish settlements in the occupied territories. But under the watch of the infamous Israeli leader, in 2005, Jewish settlers and Israeli troops withdrew from the Gaza Strip in what was called a disengagement process. This was meant to herald a new era of Israeli-Palestinian politics, but little changed. The plan deferred little control over to Palestinians, with Israel retaining control over Gaza's borders, airspace and territorial waters. During this time, Sharon left his serving role in Likud to form the Kadima party, which went on to govern Israel until the return of Benjamin Netanyahu in 2011. Kadima is seen as a centrist and liberal political party in Israel. It was established by members of Likud who supported Sharon. In 2006, it became the largest party in the Knesset, but it is now the smallest, holding only 2 seats. Prior to this recent offensive, the Gaza War in 2008 launched a widespread serial bombing campaign on residential homes, schools and United Nations buildings and hospitals. A ground assault followed and at least 1,400 Palestinians were killed in the offensive. A further operation ensued in 2012, with hundreds left dead and over 1,000 injured. Israel's continued settlement building, demolition of Palestinian homes and defiance of 69 United Nations Security Council resolutions has led to its isolation from some of the international community. But protected by its allies, there is no suggestion that the Israeli Knesset is willing or wanting to change. Operation Protective Edge is the third major offensive in the Gaza Strip over the last 6 years. As a result, at least 2,500 Palestinians and 62 Israelis have so far been killed.
If ever there was a time to use that awful saying, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter," it would be here. Hamas finds itself on the list of designated terrorist organizations in America, Israel, the European Union, Egypt and Canada. But across the world, it also has the support of many, many people. Whether on the streets of Peru or Indonesia, Bangladesh or Turkey, thousands of ordinary people have come together to show their solidarity. Even in the West Bank, which is run by Hamas's former rival organization Fatah, the streets have been filled up with people calling on Israel to halt its attacks. Hamas and Fatah, once bitter foes, this summer put aside their differences and signed a Palestinian unity deal. But their long-standing rivalry means many people are skeptical about the deal's longevity. And this latest series of bombings by Israel is set to strain Hamas-Fatah relations even further. Israel condemned the Palestinian unity deal and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged Washington not to recognize the new government, saying he was deeply troubled by it. But there are those who say Israel helped spawn Hamas in its early years. Hamas was born out of an association with Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood movement during the first Palestinian Intifada, or uprising, in 1987. It muscled aside secular Palestinian groups to become the party of choice for residents of Gaza. In the 1990s, allegations emerged that the Israeli government was working with the group as a counterweight to the secular nationalists of the Palestine Liberation Organization and its dominant faction, Fatah. Today there's no way to verify this, but the man who led Hamas at the time soon became a hate figure in Israel. In 2004, an Israeli airstrike killed Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, the blind leader who was in his wheelchair at the time, making his way home from dawn prayers. And then came the 2006 vote, deemed fair by international observers, and which saw Hamas elected to power in a sweeping victory that trounced the governing Fatah party and dramatically reshaped Palestinian relations with Israel and the rest of the world. Hamas won over half the contested parliamentary seats and in doing so stunned American, Israeli and EU officials who repeatedly stated they would not work with a Palestinian Authority that included Hamas. An international boycott ensued and slowly Palestinians were being forced to reconsider their democratic choice. 8 years, 3 wars and several thousand funerals later, Israel insists its war on Gaza is about self-defense against what it calls a terrorist organization. But the vast number of civilian deaths on the Palestinian side gives weight to the idea that this isn't really just about Hamas. The organization is still viewed by most of Gaza's residents as the only force able to withstand Israeli aggression and put Palestinian needs first, the one they say they can rely on to bring some semblance of fairness back into the Gaza Strip.